I watched the reflection in the stainless steel oven as my husband, Gavin, slipped 3 drops of poison into my water. I was 12 weeks pregnant with the child we had tried 3 years to conceive. In that second, I realized I was just a paycheck for the secret family he was hiding. He wanted my assets, even if it meant killing me. Instead of screaming, I switched the glass and prepared to destroy him. My name is Elena. I am 32 years old, the CEO of Vanguard Structures, and until tonight, I thought I had everything a woman could want. We were in our penthouse overlooking the glittering Chicago skyline, the city lights spreading out below us like a sea of electric diamonds. The occasion was supposed to be a celebration. My husband, Gavin, had told me he finally secured a senior vice president position at his firm. I had arranged a private dinner, cooked his favorite meal, and was doing my best to play the role of the supportive wife, despite the exhaustion that clung to my bones. Being 12 weeks pregnant meant I was constantly tired, but I pushed through it for him. Gavin was playing the part of the doting husband perfectly. He guided me toward the kitchen island, his hand resting gently on the small of my back. He told me I looked pale and insisted that I needed to hydrate for the baby's sake. His voice was dripping with concern as he walked over to the refrigerator to fetch me a glass of water. I turned away from him to check on the roast in the oven. The kitchen was a masterpiece of modern design, filled with high-end appliances, but it was the pristine, mirror-like finish of the stainless steel oven door that saved my life. The reflection was crisp and undeniable. I saw Gavin standing behind me at the counter. He was not just pouring water. He glanced over his shoulder to ensure my back was turned, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small plastic bottle that looked like ordinary eye drops. My heart stopped as I watched him squeeze 3 distinct drops of a clear liquid into my glass. He swirled it quickly, tucked the bottle back into his pocket, and composed his face into a smile before turning around. Panic surged through me, hot and violent. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab a knife from the block and demand to know what he was doing. But the CEO in me, the woman who managed multi-million-dollar construction contracts and navigated cutthroat boardroom politics, took over. If I confronted him now, without proof, he would gaslight me. He would say it was flavor drops or vitamins. Or worse, if he realized I knew, things could turn physically dangerous immediately. I took a breath, steadying my shaking hands. When Gavin walked over, extending the glass to me with a loving smile, I turned around. As I reached for it, I deliberately let my fingers fumble. I struck the glass with the back of my hand, sending it flying into the soil of a large, expensive potted fiddle leaf fig plant standing next to the island. The glass didn't shatter, but the water soaked instantly into the dark earth. I gasped, feigning embarrassment. I apologized profusely, blaming my clumsiness on pregnancy hormones and shaky hands. For a split second, the mask slipped. I saw a flash of pure, cold rage in Gavin's eyes before he blinked it away and told me it was okay. I did not give him a chance to pour another one. I immediately grabbed a fresh glass from the cabinet, filled it from the tap right in front of him, and drank it down in one long gulp. I told him I felt much better. While he went to get a mop, I knelt down to clean up the mess. I grabbed a handful of paper towels, but I did not just wipe the floor. I pressed a thick wad of tissue firmly against the saturated soil in the few puddles on the floor tiles, soaking up as much of the tainted water as I could. I balled the wet, compromised tissues up and shoved them deep into the pocket of my robe, pretending to just be tidying up. That night was the longest of my life. I lay in our king-sized bed, listening to the rhythmic sound of Gavin snoring beside me. He sounded so peaceful, so normal, under the duvet. My hand rested protectively over my lower abdomen. I was sleeping next to a man who had tried to terminate my pregnancy and possibly my life, just hours ago. My mind raced, connecting dots I had been too blind to see before. It wasn't just the water. It was the schedule. Gavin had been taking an unusual number of business trips to Seattle lately. He claimed the merger required his presence every weekend. I had believed him because I wanted to believe him. I had financed his lifestyle, bought his cars, and paid for this penthouse, thinking we were building a future. Now, I realized I was likely funding my own execution. I stared at the ceiling as the sun began to rise over Lake Michigan. I was not going to cry. I was not going to be a victim. By the time the first light hit the window, I had a plan. I carefully took the sodden paper towels from my robe pocket and sealed them in a Ziploc bag. I have a friend from college who runs a private toxicology lab. I would be at her door the moment she opened. I needed to know exactly what poison my husband was feeding me. The lab report arrived on my encrypted server exactly 24 hours later. I sat in my office at Vanguard Structures, the door locked, staring at the chemical breakdown on the screen. The substance Gavin had slipped into my water was not a vitamin or a mild sedative. It was a highly concentrated synthetic compound used to induce violent uterine contractions. The toxicology report noted that at the dosage found in the sample, it would not just cause a miscarriage, it would likely trigger a massive hemorrhage. If I had not been near immediate emergency medical care, I would have bled out in my own home. The realization hit me harder than a physical blow. Gavin was not just trying to get rid of an unwanted responsibility. He was gambling with my life. In fact, my death was likely the preferred outcome. If I died in childbirth or from pregnancy complications, he, as my grieving widower, would inherit everything without a messy divorce. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with morning sickness. I was living with a man who had calculated the profit margin of my murder. I pushed the horror down and let the cold, analytical side of my brain take over. I logged into our joint accounts and then deeper, into the secondary expense accounts for the company that I usually let the finance department handle. I spent the next 6 hours auditing my own life. I found the leaks almost immediately. They were small at first, easy to miss. There were charges for client entertainment at restaurants on days I knew he was home. There were donations to a charity called the Skylark Foundation. When I ran a background check on the charity, it led to a shell company registered to a P.O. box in a town 40 miles west of Chicago. I did not confront him. Instead, I hired a private investigator named Miller. I used a burner phone and paid him in cash so there would be no paper trail. I gave him one simple instruction, which was to find out where my husband really went when he claimed to be traveling for work. 2 days later, Gavin kissed me goodbye at the door, suitcase in hand. He told me the merger in Seattle was reaching a critical phase and he would be gone for the weekend. He looked me in the eye and told me he would miss me and the baby. I smiled, told him to travel safe, and watched him get into his car. He never went to the airport. Miller sent the first batch of updates an hour later. Gavin had driven his Porsche, the one I bought him for his 30th birthday, straight to a quiet, upscale suburb called Naperville. He pulled into the driveway of a charming 2-story colonial house with a manicured lawn and a white picket fence. It was the kind of house you see in toothpaste commercials. Then came the photographs. I sat in my penthouse, surrounded by cold marble and glass, looking at pictures of my husband embracing another woman on the front porch of that suburban house. She was younger, perhaps 25, with a soft, easy smile. He kissed her with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. But that was not the blow that brought me to my knees. The next photo showed the front door opening again. A small boy, maybe 4 years old, ran out in pajamas. In the series of high-definition shots, I saw the boy leap into Gavin's arms. I saw Gavin catch him, lift him high in the air, and laugh. I could practically hear the child screaming the word, "Daddy." I zoomed in on the timestamp. 4 years old. That meant this child existed before we were even married. This was not an affair. This was his life. I was the side piece. I was the bankroll. He had a whole other family, a real family that he went home to, while I was just the host organism he returned to during the week to extract resources. He was feeding them with my money, sheltering them with my hard work, and now he was trying to kill my unborn child to protect their inheritance. I stared at the happy family in the photograph, and the last remnant of love I had for Gavin evaporated, replaced by a cold, terrifying resolve. I became an actress in my own home. When Gavin returned from his so-called business trip to Seattle, I greeted him with a weary smile, complaining of backaches and nausea. I let him rub my feet while I fought the urge to kick him in the face. I played the fragile, dependent wife so perfectly that he never suspected the predator watching him from behind my heavy eyelids. My performance had to be flawless because I needed to turn our home into a trap. The moment he left for his next visit to his family in Naperville, I moved with military precision. I hired a specialized security team, paying them triple their usual rate for discretion and speed. Within 4 hours, my penthouse was wired. Micro cameras were hidden in the smoke detectors, the eyes of paintings, and the intricate decorative molding of the ceiling. I even had a listening device planted inside the leather headrest of his driver's seat and a GPS tracker magnetized to the undercarriage of his Porsche. Digital surveillance was riskier, but necessary. One evening, while Gavin was taking a shower, I slipped into the bathroom, the sound of the water masking my movements. I picked up his phone from the marble counter. I unlocked it using the passcode I had watched him enter 1,000 times. I installed a mirrored cloning app that would send every text, call log, and location ping directly to my secure cloud. My heart hammered against my ribs as the installation bar crept forward. 90%. 99%. I set the phone back on the counter exactly 2 seconds before the water stopped running. When he stepped out, toweling off his hair, I was already in the bedroom, reading a book on prenatal care. The intelligence started flowing in immediately. The cameras caught what I missed while I was at work or sleeping. I watched a recording of Gavin pacing in our living room while I was supposedly napping. He was talking on the phone. His voice dropped to a hush. He was talking to her. Maya. I heard him say clearly that the bitch is going to lose the baby soon. He told her to be patient and that once the miscarriage complications set in, they would have the payout they needed to move to Europe. He spoke about my death as if it were a business transaction, a necessary step to upgrade his lifestyle. Then came the second blow. Maya was not just waiting for him. She was pregnant again. They needed my money to fund their second child while killing my first. The rage I felt was cold and hard, like a block of ice sitting in my chest. I did not cry. I opened a new encrypted file on my laptop which I named Project Clean Sweep. Into it went everything. The audio files, the video clips, the bank statements showing the siphoned funds, and the toxicology report from the lab. I was building a mountain of evidence that would bury them both. I took the ultimate precaution regarding my assets. I met with my estate attorney in a park, far away from any electronic eyes or ears. We redrafted my will, effective immediately, if I were to die under any circumstances. My entire estate, including my shares in Vanguard Structures and all liquid assets, would be liquidated and donated to a charity for battered women. Gavin would receive nothing. Not a cent. Not even the house. The atmosphere in the penthouse grew tighter with each passing day. Gavin was getting restless. I was still pregnant. I was still healthy. Thanks to the fact that I was pouring his poisoned water into my sample jars every time he turned his back. I could see the frustration in his jaw when he looked at my growing belly. He was running out of time and patience. I knew he was preparing to increase the dosage or switch to a more direct method. I had to stay one step ahead, but the waiting game was becoming dangerous. Greed is a predictable mechanism, and I decided to use it to speed up his destruction. I needed to make Gavin sloppy, so I dangled a bait so large he would not be able to look away. Over dinner that Tuesday, I casually mentioned a complication with a silent partnership I held in a tech startup. I lowered my voice and told him that the project was liquidating and my share of the special dividend was $5 million. I sighed and rubbed my temples, explaining that if I took the money directly under my name right now, the corporate tax hit would be astronomical. I said I wished I had a trusted third party to hold the assets temporarily as a nominee. Gavin almost dropped his fork. I watched the calculations running behind his eyes. He immediately leaned in, covering my hand with his. He told me that as my husband, he was the safest option. He insisted he could set up a separate holding account to protect the money for our future. It was pathetic how quickly he switched from trying to kill me to trying to keep me alive, at least until the papers were signed. Suddenly, he was obsessed with my well-being, constantly asking if I was warm enough or if I needed a pillow, purely because he needed a living, breathing wife to authorize the transfer of $5 million. I left a folder labeled Cayman Holdings on the study desk that evening. Inside were documents for a bank account that did not exist and login credentials for a phishing site I had my IT security team build. It was a honeypot, designed to capture not just his IP address, but his intent. The alert came through to my secure tablet at 2 in the morning. Gavin was downstairs. He had logged into the fake portal, but he did not just look at the balance. He took screenshots and forwarded them immediately to Maya. I monitored the data stream in real time from my bed. Maya was not just a passive beneficiary of his crimes, she was the architect. Her reply came back within seconds. She told him to make sure I signed the power of attorney by Friday, and then to increase the dosage so they could be in Paris by the end of the month. She was driving him, pushing him to be more aggressive. She was not an innocent woman caught in a lie. She was a monster demanding blood money. The escalation began the very next morning. Gavin brought me a glass of warm milk in bed, claiming it was a special organic blend for expectant mothers. I thanked him, waited for him to go into the bathroom to shower, and then poured the entire glass into a collection jar I had hidden in my nightstand. I replaced it with fresh milk I had stashed in a thermos under the bed and drank that instead. When he came out and saw the empty glass, he looked relieved. He thought he was winning. It was time to shatter their sense of security. I knew from the investigator's report that his son was obsessed with a specific brand of remote-controlled cars. I bought the most expensive limited edition model available, costing nearly $500, and had it shipped overnight to Maya's address in Naperville. I sent it anonymously. No card, no return address. Just a gift that showed someone knew exactly who they were and where they lived. The reaction was immediate and satisfying. Through the listening device in his car, I heard the panic in his voice when Maya called him later that day. She was hysterical. She screamed that someone was watching them. She was terrified that I knew, or that the police were involved. Gavin tried to calm her down, but his voice was shaking too. They were starting to fracture under the pressure of the unknown, and their paranoia was exactly what I needed to force them into making a fatal mistake. They thought they were the hunters, but they were beginning to realize they were the prey. I decided to bring the enemy inside the gates. I told Gavin that we needed to host a small, intimate dinner party for a few key investors to maintain appearances. Then, while adjusting his tie in the mirror, I dropped the trap. I suggested that he invite his cousin, Maya, since she was in town. He froze, his hands stilling on the silk knot. He had used Maya as a cover story for years, claiming she was a distant relative he was helping out financially to explain the odd withdrawals and phone calls. He could not refuse without raising suspicion, so he forced a smile and agreed. When Maya arrived, she played the part of the grateful, modest relative poorly. She wore a dress that was simple but clearly brand new, and her eyes did not meet mine with warmth. Instead, they darted around the penthouse, assessing the marble floors, the art on the walls, and the jewelry around my neck. It was the look of a woman measuring curtains for a house she thought she had already bought. She was beautiful in a sharp, hungry way, but beneath the polite pleasantries, I could feel the radiation of her jealousy. Dinner was a masterclass in tension. I sat at the head of the table, radiating the glow of impending motherhood. I made a point to steer the conversation toward the baby. I placed my hand on my stomach and spoke about how much Gavin and I were looking forward to meeting our son, how we had already picked out names, and how we were designing the nursery. I watched them closely. Every time I mentioned the future of our family, Gavin shifted in his chair, taking long sips of his wine. Maya just stared at her plate, her knife cutting into her steak with a little too much force. Then, right as dessert was being served, I executed the test. I let out a sharp, sudden gasp and dropped my spoon. It clattered loudly against the china. I doubled over, clutching my abdomen with both hands. groaning in pain. The room went silent. The guests looked alarmed, but I was only focused on two people. Gavin did not jump up in panic. He did not rush to my side with the terror of a father about to lose his child. Instead, for one fraction of a second, he stopped moving. He looked across the table at Maya, and his eyes lit up with a chilling, triumphant spark. It was a look that said, "It is finally working." Maya did not look concerned either. She looked relieved, her lips parting in anticipation. They thought the poison had finally reached critical mass. I let the silence hang for 3 seconds, enough to etch that look of betrayal into my memory forever. Then, I reached for my water glass, the one I had poured myself from a sealed bottle, and took a long, calm sip. I straightened my back, took a deep breath, and smiled brightly at the room. I told them it was just a very strong kick and that the baby must be excited about the dessert. The disappointment that washed over Gavin and Maya was palpable. It was as if I had punched them both in the gut. Gavin slumped back in his chair, his face draining of color, while Maya glared at me with undisguised hatred. 10 minutes later, I saw them both slip away toward the hallway. I excused myself and went to the master bedroom, pulling up the feed from the hidden camera in the guest bathroom. They were huddled together by the sink, the water running to mask their voices, but my audio enhancement picked up everything. Maya was furious. She hissed at him that this was taking too long. She grabbed his lapel and gave him an ultimatum. She told him that if I was not out of the picture by the end of the week, she was taking their son and leaving. She said she was tired of waiting for a dead woman to die. Gavin begged her for more time, promising her that he would finish it, that he would do whatever it took. I closed the laptop. The game was over. They were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. I had enough evidence to bury them, but I needed to ensure the final blow was absolute. I could not just send them to jail. I had to destroy their entire world. I checked the calendar. The baby moon trip Gavin had suggested was coming up in 2 days. It was time to go. The ultimatum in the bathroom had changed the timeline. Gavin was now on Maya's clock, and he became frantic. The very next morning, he presented his solution. He suggested a pre-baby vacation, a baby moon, just the two of us. He had found a stunning, isolated luxury cabin on a lake about 3 hours north. He painted a picture of quiet evenings by the fire, romantic walks, and a chance for us to connect before the baby arrived. I knew exactly what he was connecting. He was connecting my body to the bottom of that lake, or to the base of a steep staircase. An isolated cabin with no neighbors for miles. Poor cell service, and a pregnant wife prone to dizziness was the perfect stage for a tragic accident. I pretended to weep with gratitude. I told him it was the most romantic thing he had ever suggested, that I desperately needed to get away from the city. I agreed immediately. The moment he left for the office, my own preparations began. I made 2 calls. The first was to Miller, my investigator. I met him in a parking garage and handed him a drive containing the highlights reel of my evidence, the toxicology report, the audio of Maya's ultimatum, and the recordings of Gavin plotting my death. I gave him the address of the lake house and the exact dates of our trip. His job was to deliver this package to the local sheriff's department in that county, not as an anonymous tip, but as a formal precursor to a welfare check. I wanted them aware that a woman in my condition was entering a dangerous situation. The second call was to my legal team. They arranged an immediate appointment with a forensic medical examiner. It was not a standard OB/GYN checkup. This was for the record. For 2 hours, I was put through every conceivable test. They documented my perfect blood pressure, my excellent balance, and the robust, healthy heartbeat of my fetus. The resulting report was a legally binding document stating that I was in perfect health. There was no medical reason for me to spontaneously fall down a flight of stairs or suffer a dizzy spell that would send me tumbling off a dock. Next, I addressed the finances. I logged into our joint accounts, the ones he had been leeching from for years. I transferred every liquid asset, down to the last dollar, into a new trust account under my name and the baby's. an account he had no knowledge of and no access to. I left exactly $5,000 in our checking account, just enough to look normal, enough for him to buy gas and groceries for our trip, but not enough for him to book a flight to Europe. Finally, I prepared my personal insurance. The security firm that had bugged my house provided me with a piece of equipment that looked like a simple, elegant button for my maternity blouse. It was, in fact, an audio-visual recorder with a satellite uplink. It would stream a live feed of everything I saw and heard to a secure server that my lawyer and Miller would be monitoring in real time. When the morning of the trip arrived, my overnight bag was packed. Gavin was unusually attentive, carrying my things, opening the car door, and making sure my seatbelt was comfortable. He was playing the part of the devoted husband one last time. As we pulled out of the city and the skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror, the tension in the car was thick enough to cut. He was humming along to the radio, excited about the murder he was about to commit. I just sat there, my hand resting on the small, hard button at my collar, and waited for the show to begin. The cabin was beautiful, all dark cedar and floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking a lake so still it looked like a sheet of black oil. It was also a perfect kill box, miles from the nearest neighbor. Gavin's performance of the doting husband was dialed up to an oppressive level. He insisted on carrying me over the threshold, a grotesque parody of our wedding day. He settled me by the fire and immediately began pressing juices on me. He had a whole cooler full of these prenatal power drinks he claimed to have made himself. He handed me the first one, a dark purple concoction, telling me it was full of antioxidants for the baby. I smiled, thanked him, and waited for him to go outside to check the propane tank. The moment the door clicked shut, I went to the bathroom, poured the entire drink into an evidence bag, and sealed it. I repeated this twice more before dinner, my collection of his attempted murders growing in my luggage. The main event began after dinner. He steeped me a cup of calming herbal tea, telling me the mountain air and a good night's sleep would do wonders for my stress. I knew this was it. I pretended to drink it, letting the liquid fill my mouth while he watched, then swallowing a tiny, harmless amount and letting the rest dribble down my chin as if I were drowsy. I leaned my head back, let my eyes flutter shut, and allowed the cup to slip from my fingers onto the plush rug, feigning a sudden, deep sleep. He bought it. He half carried me to the master bedroom and laid me on the bed, not even bothering to pull the covers over me. I lay perfectly still, my breathing deep and rhythmic, and I waited. At 1:15 in the morning, I heard the faint sound of the front door lock being turned. A second set of footsteps entered the cabin. It was quiet, but I heard a woman's whispered voice. Maya. She had driven up separately, just as I'd suspected, to help her lover create the perfect alibi. From my feigned sleep, I listened. The button camera on my maternity pajamas was streaming audio directly to my secure server. They were in the main room, just feet from my door, planning my death like it was a home renovation project. She's completely out, Gavin whispered. I gave her enough to keep her down for 10 hours. Good. Maya's voice was cold and practical. In the morning, you take her out to the top of those steep wooden stairs leading to the dock. You'll say you want to look at the sunrise. Pregnant women get dizzy. It's tragic. There was a pause. What if the fall? What if it's not enough? Gavin asked. Then you make sure it is, you idiot, she hissed. And I want to be clear. I want her landing face down. I don't want any heroic doctor saving the baby. That little parasite dies with her. We need a clean break. Gavin, her death, our money, no complications. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it froze my blood. She wanted to ensure my baby was murdered before I was. Then, the bedroom door creaked open. I forced my body to remain slack, my breathing even. The tiny, motion-activated infrared camera I had installed in the smoke detector when I first arrived to take a bath was silently recording. I could feel them standing over me, two shadows in the dark, but they weren't checking my pulse. I heard the quiet zip of my luggage opening. They were looking for the fake Cayman Islands investment documents. They were robbing me before they had even bothered to kill me. I heard Maya's sharp intake of breath as she found the folder. They lingered for a moment, and then they left, closing the door behind them. I lay in the darkness, the only sound my own heart hammering against my ribs. I slowly slid my hand under the pillow, my fingers closing around the cold, hard satellite phone I had hidden there. The final act was about to begin. The sun rose over the lake, casting a deceptive golden glow on the dark water. Gavin woke me with a gentle shake of my shoulder, his smile tight and his eyes unable to meet mine. He suggested we go down to the dock to watch the mist rise off the water, claiming it would be a romantic start to our baby moon. I agreed, slipping into my coat and boots. As I zipped up my jacket, I reached up and pressed the concealed activation sequence on the small device pinned under my collar. A tiny vibration against my collarbone confirmed the connection. The audio live stream was active. My lawyer, the private investigator, and the local sheriff's dispatch were now listening to every word. We walked down the sloping path toward the water. The air was freezing, and the wooden planks of the dock were slick with morning dew, creating the perfect conditions for a tragic slip and fall. Gavin walked half a step behind me, his hand hovering near the small of my back. I could feel the tension radiating off him. He was not guiding his pregnant wife. He was escorting a victim to the slaughter. We reached the end of the pier, where the water was deep and black. I heard his footsteps stop. I felt his muscles coil as he prepared to shove me into the freezing depths. I did not scream. I did not beg. Instead, I spun around on my heel with the precision of a soldier, locking eyes with him before his hands could make contact. "How are Maya and your son doing this morning, Gavin?" I asked, my voice calm and conversational. Gavin froze as if he had been struck by lightning. His hands were still raised in the air, caught in the act of murder. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and ghostly. He looked at me with total incomprehension. The sudden introduction of his secret reality into this moment shattered his script completely. I took a step toward him, forcing him to take a reflexive step back toward the edge. I continued, my voice steady and loud enough for the microphone to pick up clearly. I told him that I knew about the vial of aconite he currently had in his jacket pocket. I told him I knew about the abortion drugs he had been slipping into my water for the last 2 months. I told him I knew that he was planning to use my life insurance payout to cover the massive gambling debts for Maya's brother in Las Vegas. Panic replaced the shock in his eyes. He realized the plan was not just failing, it was incinerating. He began to shake his head violently, his breathing coming in short, jagged gasps. He shouted that I was crazy, that I was hormonal and paranoid. He lunged toward me, his face twisting into a mask of aggression. He was no longer trying to stage an accident. He was desperate enough to commit a crime of passion. Suddenly, movement caught my eye. The cabin door at the top of the hill flew open. Maya came sprinting down the grassy slope. She was not coming to de-escalate the situation. She was gripping a heavy cast-iron fireplace poker in her hand, her face contorted with rage. She realized he was hesitating, and she intended to finish the job herself. She screamed at him to push me, her voice shrill and echoing across the silent lake. I did not run. I stood my ground and raised my left wrist, turning the screen of my smartwatch toward them. The display showed a live call in progress. I looked Gavin dead in the eye and delivered the final blow. I told him that the police had been listening to this entire conversation since we left the cabin and that the patrol units were exactly 2 minutes away. As if summoned by my watch, the thin, piercing wail of police sirens broke the morning silence. They were distant at first, a faint cry over the trees, but they were growing louder with every second. The sound hit Gavin and Maya like a physical force. Maya, who had been charging at me with the fireplace poker, stopped dead. The heavy iron slipped from her grasp and clanged loudly on the wooden planks of the dock. the sound echoing across the water. Pure animal panic replaced their coordinated malice. They looked at each other, not as lovers, but as co-conspirators whose escape route was closing. "The boat!" Gavin screamed. He shoved past me, scrambling for the speedboat that was tied to the pier. Maya was right behind him, hiking up her clothes to leap in after him. They were leaving me. They were not trying to silence me or finish the job. They were just running. Gavin vaulted over the side and jammed the key into the ignition, his hands shaking violently. He twisted it. A dull, grinding click was the only response. The engine did not turn over. "Start! Damn you! Start!" he shrieked, pumping the throttle and twisting the key again and again. Click, click, click. He did not know that I had been busy while he and Maya were asleep. After they had ransacked my luggage, I had slipped out of the cabin with a small flashlight and the toolbox from under the kitchen sink. It took me 20 minutes in the freezing dark, but I found the engine block. I reached inside, located the spark plug wire, and gave it a sharp, decisive pull. The boat was never going to start. The sirens were deafeningly close now, coming down the long gravel driveway. The boat was useless. Gavin understood that it was over. His desperation took a new, disgusting turn. He climbed out of the boat and fell to his knees on the dock, crawling toward me. He grabbed the hem of my coat, his face streaked with tears and mucus. He begged me to help him. He told me it was all Maya. He pointed a shaking finger at her, still frozen in the boat. He sobbed that she had forced him, that she had threatened to take his son away if he did not do what she said. He said she was a poison, a manipulator who had twisted his love for me into this nightmare. It was the final betrayal, and it was the one that broke Maya. Hearing herself framed as the mastermind, she exploded. She launched herself out of the boat, not at me, but at him. She screamed, a raw, guttural sound, and clawed at his face, raking her nails down his cheeks. He yelled, shoving her back, and she stumbled, hitting the pier hard. Their entire alliance, built on my money and their shared sociopathy, imploded in a chaotic tangle of curses and violence. I did not move. I just stood on the solid shore, my hand resting protectively on my stomach, and I watched. I watched the two people who had plotted my murder tear each other apart in their desperation. The sound of car doors slamming shut echoed from above, followed by a voice amplified by a megaphone. "Get on the ground, hands, where we can see them." 2 sheriff's deputies were at the top of the path, their weapons drawn. Gavin and Maya instantly froze, their hands shooting into the air. The officers were on them in seconds, forcing them flat onto the dock and cuffing them. As they were being pulled to their feet, Gavin was still babbling incoherently, protesting his innocence. Maya was silent, her face a mask of pure reptilian hatred. I walked calmly toward the lead officer. I unpinned the small camera button from my coat and handed it to him. I told him it contained the audio and video of the entire morning's events, including their confessions and their assault. I then went to my overnight bag, which I had brought outside, and retrieved the sealed, labeled jars of poisoned milk and juice from the past few days. Finally, I walked over to Gavin, who was being held by an officer. I reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small, clear vial. I handed that to the deputy as well. I told them this was the aconite he had planned to use, and that I had the audio from the night before to prove it. The aftermath of the arrest was swift and devastating for them. While Gavin and Maya were sitting in holding cells, the police obtained a warrant for Maya's house in Naperville. What they found there sealed their fate permanently. In her nightstand, they discovered a spiral-bound notebook containing a handwritten timeline of my murder. It was a meticulous, chilling script. She had drafted the exact dates to increase the poison dosage and had even written a practice version of the eulogy Gavin was supposed to deliver at my funeral. Her computer history was equally damning, filled with searches for odorless poisons, drug interactions, and instructions on how to stage a drowning accident. The trial was not the long, drawn-out legal battle they had hoped for. The mountain of evidence I had collected was insurmountable. The toxicology reports, the financial audit trails, the audio recordings from the penthouse, and the live stream of their confession on the dock left no room for doubt. Their defense attorneys looked exhausted before the opening statements even began. The judge showed no mercy. Gavin was sentenced to 25 years in a state penitentiary for attempted first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and fraud. Maya received 15 years for her role as an accomplice and co-conspirator. The most tragic casualty of their greed was their son. With both parents incarcerated and no other relatives deemed fit by the state, the boy was placed into the foster care system. It was a heartbreaking reality, but I knew I could not save everyone. On the day of the sentencing, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. I was 8 months pregnant by then, my belly round and heavy with life. I wore a bright white dress, standing out against the drab gray of the courtroom. When the gavel came down, Gavin turned to look at me one last time. He looked small, withered, and terrified. I did not feel the rage I expected. I only felt a profound sense of pity. He had a life of luxury, a wife who loved him, and a future that was secure, and he had thrown it all away because he was too weak to be honest. I looked him in the eye, shook my head slightly, and then turned my back on him forever. After the trial, I decided not to retreat into silence. I went public with my story, giving exclusive interviews to major news outlets. I wanted to turn my trauma into a weapon for other women. I spoke about the importance of financial independence, of trusting your instincts, and of never ignoring the red flags. I rebranded my company, stripping Gavin's name and influence from every contract and letterhead. I scrubbed him from my life as thoroughly as I had scrubbed the floors of my home. Now, I am sitting in the nursery, which is finally complete. The room is painted a soft, warm yellow, and the morning sun is streaming through the sheer curtains, illuminating the crib. I am holding a glass of water in my hand. It is crystal clear, cold, and pure. I take a long, refreshing sip, savoring the clean taste. My hand rests on my stomach, and I feel a strong, rhythmic kick against my palm. My son is healthy, strong, and safe. I smile, realizing that I did not just filter the poison from my cup. I filtered the toxicity from my entire existence. I removed the betrayal, the lies, and the danger, leaving behind only peace and a future that belongs entirely to us. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. So please drop a comment below sharing your city or country so we can connect and share our thoughts. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.